Alaska, your constituency, Mr. President, all the rest in this room. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'd rest my comments there, but I do have an item from the leadership. Let me read this. I ask consent that any time spent during a quorum call between now and 2:30 p.m. be equally divided.
Without objection.
Again, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I yield the floor, but I hope, and I, you know, if there's one thing I look for, if it makes a difference for Alaska, if it's about Alaska, I'm there. This is not only about Alaska, it's about this country. It's about the middle class. Not only am I there, I'm double there. And I hope we find the opportunity in this chamber to do the right thing. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, the Senate will consider my legislation again to extend the temporary payroll tax cut. This week, the Senate has been given another opportunity to do the right thing and provide much-needed relief to the American worker. It shouldn't be news to anyone that Americans are desperate for solutions. Millions of Americans are unemployed, underemployed, or have simply given up looking for a job. In between looking for a job or paying higher paying employment, Americans are busy trying to figure out how to handle high health care costs, looming bankruptcy, and the threat of foreclosure. As a senator from Nevada, I understand how difficult it is, perhaps more than any of my other colleagues. My state has the unfortunate distinction of leading the nation in unemployment, in bankruptcies, and in foreclosures. I hear from my constituents every day on these issues. Nevadans, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans are looking to Congress for answers, and they are frustrated that they are not getting them. Even with economic difficulty Americans across the country are experiencing, Congress appears to be prepared to stage a partisan standoff rather than extending a payroll tax cut for hardworking Americans. Mr. President, I cannot allow this to happen. Americans deserve solutions. The plan I have introduced to extend the payroll tax cut is a workable solution that will provide relief for Americans responsibly. In fact, the solution I'm proposing today borrows a cost-cutting idea from the bipartisan Simpson-Bowles Commission that can actually pass Congress and be signed into law. My proposal allows American taxpayers to hold on to more of their hard-earned wages while not punishing the nation's job creators like the majority proposes. Under my plan, American taxpayers will not see a tax increase. In fact, my plan prevents a tax increase on those already receiving payroll tax credit. Today, Congress can do the right thing by allowing employers to continue to invest in their businesses so that they can plan for the future and, of course, hire more workers. I understand that Democrats would prefer to pay for the payroll extension by raising taxes on employers. But treating tax dollars responsibly is absolutely necessary if we're going to see long-term economic growth in this country. In this case, we can extend the payroll tax cut and still pay for it. I also understand that not all Republicans support my plan. To be honest, I disagree with some of my colleagues who claim a payroll tax holiday is not necessary. I believe that we should allow more Americans to hold on to their hard-earned wages. For those who are already struggling to live within their means, this payroll tax cut will continue some much-needed relief. Today, I'm asking my Republican and Democratic colleagues to come together, join me to help continue the payroll tax holiday without raising taxes on businesses here in America. This will help preserve long-term job growth in the future. My proposal is a workable solution containing provisions endorsed by both the majority and my colleagues in the House of Representatives. This is the only version of the payroll tax cut that has the potential to pass Congress and to be signed into law. My proposal pays for the payroll tax cut by reducing government spending where it's no longer needed and requires the richest Americans to pay higher premiums for Medicare. This will allow us to strengthen and preserve Medicare for those Americans who rely on the program the most. This is the same approach endorsed by Democrats who say the richest Americans should do more. Americans want solutions. They do not want more partisan bickering. Congress this week has another opportunity to do the right thing to help hardworking Americans extend the payroll tax cut holiday. I make calls back to my home state every week. In those calls, I ask Nevadans if they think their children will have access to a better, brighter future than their own. And for the first time in history, a majority of Americans and a majority of Nevadans believe that their children will have less opportunity. By continuing down this path of partisanship, Congress is robbing the American people of the dream for their children. This needs to stop. We in this body need to seriously consider the high stakes of the political games that continue to unfold on this Senate floor. American workers need solutions, and they need relief right now. Congress should come together today, put partisanship aside, pass meaningful legislation that will benefit all Americans. Thank you, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka? Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would also ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I rise this afternoon to speak about an issue that we'll be voting on today, and we've been discussing and debating now for a number of days. We're into our second week of debate about a cut in the payroll tax. And just by way of review, and so many Americans have been following this debate, here's where it basically stands between what we did last year and what we're trying to do this year. Last year, as part of a larger tax bill, we reduced the payroll tax for employees across the country from 6.2% to 4.2%. So that 2% reduction meant that millions of American families were able to have about $1,000 in their pocket, take-home pay, that they wouldn't have had otherwise absent that action in the tax bill last year. What we're trying to do this year, and I should start with what I tried to do last week, and we got 51 votes for this, was to say that we should not only continue or extend that cut in the payroll tax, but we should expand it. So instead of saying it goes from 6.2 to 4.2, we take it down to 3.1. In essence, what we tried to do last week was cut in half the payroll tax as it relates to employees. We wanted to add to that cutting in half the payroll tax for businesses, small businesses, who would benefit disproportionately. And then thirdly, to add to that a tax credit, so that if you're an employer and you hired or you increased your wages for your employees, if you expanded your payroll in more ways than one, or one of several ways, I should say. If you did that, you could get a tax credit equal to an elimination of the payroll tax cut. So instead of the usual 6.2, you'd be down to 0. So the combination of those three would be that you'd be helping employees, cutting their payroll tax in half, helping employers, cutting their payroll contribution in half, and then you had this third element as well for employers that actually hired people or added to their wage base. Unfortunately, in the Senate, because we needed 60 votes and got 51, we knew at that point that we couldn't get enough support from the other side of the aisle. So what I did, in working with our leadership and working with folks here in the Senate, was to refashion the legislation so that we made it smaller, reduced the cost of the overall proposal by some $80 billion, and said that why don't we just concentrate on the element that we worked on together last year, which was the employee side. So here's where we are. The debate about cutting the employee payroll tax is down to this. It's down to this question. Should we cut it to 4.2 like we did last year, or should we cut it further and reduce it in half? I believe we should. I think most Americans believe that. But here's what it means to folks out there. Instead of saying that we'll continue what we did last year by cutting it in half, that would be about $1,000 per worker, in essence, per family on average. If we cut it in half, we can get that number up to $1,500. So it's not just putting money in people's pockets and continuing that for another year, but it's more money. It would go from roughly $1,000 to approximately $1,500. So that's where we are, and unfortunately, we're not yet sure that we can get the support that we need to do just that. And here's what it means to Americans. It means more money in your pocket, more take-home pay. But it also means if we don't extend, at a minimum, extend the payroll tax cut from last year, here's what it means in terms of two issues: GDP, gross domestic product, and jobs. According to Mark Zandi of Moody's Analytics, someone we've quoted often, both sides of the aisle, and have relied upon his analysis and his expertise. Mark Zandi says that not extending the payroll tax, at least to the 4.2 level, would reduce 2012 real GDP in a state like Pennsylvania, by way of example, by 0.52 percentage points. So that means you're talking about gross domestic product or gross state product, in a sense, in a state like Pennsylvania, cutting that in half instead of allowing it to grow. So this has a real adverse consequence for Pennsylvania and for the country if we don't do what we did last year. Of course, if we do more than we did last year, like I think we should, and I think most people do, we could not only not fall behind, but we could move forward dramatically. Here's another way to look at it, jobs. According to Mark Zandi, not extending the payroll tax cut will cost Pennsylvania 19,700 payroll jobs in the calendar year 2012. For context, the state of Pennsylvania last year, the job creation, the payroll tax job creation number, or payroll, I should say, payroll jobs added last year, 54,500. So we've created, in the last year in a state like Pennsylvania, almost 55,000 jobs. But if we don't extend the payroll tax cut this year, you're talking about losing as many as almost 20,000 jobs. So this is a substantial factor in the discussion about our economy. And it would have a substantially adverse impact if we don't keep the payroll tax cut in place. And as I said before, we should do more than we did last year. We should cut it in half. It would give people across the country peace of mind in two time periods. The next couple of weeks, when they're going out and shopping and enjoying the holidays, we want people to spend as much as they feel they can. And if they know they're going to get $1,000 to $1,500, they can spend more in this upcoming holiday season. But especially it's important for 2012. Why should taxpayers have to live with a tax increase because Washington just didn't get along and the same old political games were played here in Washington, instead of saying let's come together in a bipartisan way and expand and extend, or I should say extend and expand the payroll tax cut from last year. So we've got lots to do in the next couple of days and weeks. But maybe the most important thing we can do in the next few days is to make sure that we cut the payroll tax again. Because this is about whether or not we're going to give people peace of mind as we head into a new year, and whether or not we're going to put more money in their pockets in order to jumpstart the economy, to give the economy the jolt that we got at the end of last year, where we came together, passed a tax bill, and you had average job growth in February of 2011, March and April, those 3 months, average private sector job growth of just about 240,000 jobs. We need another 3-month period like that. In fact, we need another 6 or 7 months or 8 months like that. But the only way to get there is to put in place this payroll tax cut. So I would hope that when we vote later today, that we would get at least 60 votes for this effort to make sure that we're giving Americans peace of mind and more money in their pockets. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Connecticut.
I ask that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I ask to speak despite the expiration of the majority's time.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I begin by thanking my colleagues, many of whom served in the last Congress. I thank them for extending the payroll tax cut at that time, providing a payroll tax cut from 6.2% to 4.2%. I thank them on behalf of myself. I was not a member of this body at that time. I thank them on behalf of the American people. They are due that thanks and appreciation for that vision and courage in extending that measure, in cutting the payroll tax so as to avoid recession. We have only to listen to the unquestioned, virtually unanimous opinion of economists to the effect that we saved the nation. This body saved the nation from recession. Now I ask my colleagues to undertake a similar mission to accomplish the same goal, to once again save the nation from a recession. The recovery of this nation's economy has been fragile and slow, and many economists, notably Mark Zandri, who has been quoted by my distinguished colleague from Pennsylvania, say that a failure to extend it will mean a new recession. We're talking here about average Americans, ordinary people who are hurting and struggling. They are hurting economically and struggling to find jobs. They are struggling to stay in their homes and keep their families together at a time of year when joy and satisfaction ought to be the quality of their lives. And they deserve this measure of peace of mind, as my colleague from Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, has referred to it. But all of us, the entire nation, deserves the economic security which is a matter of national security. Rescuing this country from the continuing debt and deficit means returning to full employment. 25% of our deficit can be eliminated by going back to lower rates of employment. Economic recovery is a means to countering and curtailing what the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called a national crisis and a security threat. Economic recovery depends on consumer demand. As I go around the state of Connecticut, business people tell me what they need most is consumer demand. And their confidence and certainty about the future of the economy, their willingness to invest, depends on consumer demand. That kind of factor, that need, is what ought to motivate all of my colleagues, every member of this body, to vote for this measure, not only extending that payroll tax cut, but also enlarging it to 3.1%. We're talking about anywhere from $1,400 to $1,500 or more in the pockets of people around the country, people around the state of Connecticut. The middle-class family, average middle-class family in Connecticut earns $83,797 per year and would save $1,676 in taxes under the current payroll tax. Let me give you those numbers again. The average middle-class family in Connecticut, $83,797 per year. Back in their pockets, $1,676 in taxes under the current payroll tax cut as proposed in this measure. Now, we're talking here about a compromise. Our side of the aisle has modified this bill to make it about 1/3 smaller in size and cost. And this legislation will no longer give employers a tax break. We have pulled back on the magnitude of this measure, but it will still affect 160 million families and workers who will receive nearly $1,500 in take-home pay. This bill will be paid for by measures that were coming from the deficit reduction proposals contained in a number of the super committees' ideas. It is paid for by fees charged to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, by proposals suggested by my colleague, the Republican leader. The cost-saving reform suggested by him would make millionaires ineligible for unemployment compensation and food stamps. And this legislation also levies a surcharge, temporary 10-year surcharge, on the highest earners in American society who can well afford it when their own interests would be extraordinarily well served by the consumer demand and economic recovery that would be generated. I know that many of my colleagues, including the President, the presiding officer, are concerned about the effect on Social Security, and so am I. The Social Security Trust Fund is a trust, a sacred trust, that we are honor-bound to protect. And I would not vote for this measure if I thought that it created a threat, a real threat, to the viability of that fund. But I believe that the assurance that we have received from the administrator of that fund, and it is contained in a letter to Secretary Geithner and to Jacob Lew. It was inserted in the congressional record yesterday by Senator Casey, and it assures that the effect would be negligible. In fact, it says that the trust funds would be unaffected. It uses that word, and I will quote directly from the letter. We estimate that the projected level of OSI and DI trust funds would be unaffected by enactment of this provision. That letter comes from the administrator of the trust fund, and I am prepared to rely on that assurance and to say that I believe that this kind of measure is the responsible thing to do at this point in our economic history to make sure that our recovery is continuing. The effects of failing to do so, the economists differ. Whether the rate of growth will suffer by 0.5%, which is Mark Zandri, or 0.66%, Goldman Sachs, or 1%, RBC Capital Markets, or 1.5%, Michael Pond. Whatever the specific percentage, we know it will be grave and serious in the damage to our economy if we fail to extend and enlarge the Social Security tax cut. So I urge my colleagues to heed the voices that they are hearing back home, as I am hearing from ordinary citizens, middle-class families, and we are talking here about a middle-class family measure that will benefit people like Marilyn in Bloomfield, who writes to me, I believe these cuts need to remain in effect in order to avoid deepening the recession we are in. I urge you to support the President's jobs plan and pass as much of it as you can in the upcoming legislative session for the benefit of struggling families. She writes and she says to urge you to vote in favor of extending the payroll tax cut for workers beyond December 31. And listen to people like Ginny. They're in every one of our states. Ginny, who's from Southport, Connecticut. I know you will do the right thing when the payroll tax cut and increasing the taxes of only the 2 million and above of wealthy Americans comes up for a vote. I have faith in you. With the economy still struggling to recover and millions of Americans struggling to put food on the table this holiday season, we cannot afford to raise taxes on working Americans. Those voices from middle-class families are reaching this body every day. We've heard them before. This body heeded them last year in enacting this tax cut. I thank every member who voted for it. It was a bipartisan vote. I hope this one will be as well. And I will be proud to join members from both sides of the aisle. And I hope this measure will have support, overwhelming support, from both sides of the aisle in showing the American people that we can come together, bridge our differences, and compromise. This measure reflects a compromise on both sides. And I hope that it will be passed later in the day. I thank the President, and I yield the floor and suggest